God delivered the nation of Israel from slavery in Egypt and began to lead them to the promised land that He had given to their ancestor, Abraham. When they reached the base of Mount Sinai, God gave the Israelites the 10 Commandments. They confidently told Moses, "We will do everything the Lord has said." But God required complete obedience to His laws. Every one of their actions, words, and even thoughts would be judged according to His perfect law. If they were to break even one command, they would be guilty of sin and in danger of eternal punishment. God gave the 10 Commandments so that they might function like a mirror, showing the people how sinful their hearts were compared to His perfect character. The giving of the law was an important part of God's plan of salvation. God knew that if the people could recognize the fact they were sinners, they would realize they needed someone to rescue them from their sins. That someone would be the promised deliverer. But until the deliverer came, God continued to reveal a way in which His people could be forgiven and not receive the punishment they deserved for their sins. Because there, at Mount Sinai, God not only gave His people the law, but God also revealed to Moses His plan of atonement. Atonement is the turning aside of God's punishment. Instead of pouring out His punishment upon sinful people, God would provide a way in which His punishment would be turned aside. All the requirements for atonement were to be performed at a magnificent portable structure called the tabernacle. At the tabernacle, God had promised His people, "I will dwell among you." Now, God is all-present, which means He's everywhere at the same time. But in order for His people to truly understand that He was with them, God manifested His presence by a cloud that came to rest above the tabernacle. Later on, the tabernacle would be replaced by a permanent structure called the temple. But until that day came, the tabernacle would be the center of all activity concerning atonement. In the past, men like Noah and Abraham, men who followed God, had brought their offerings and sacrifices to Him. But now, with the tabernacle, God gave the Israelites a structured way in which to bring to Him their sacrifices. These instructions were recorded for them in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. God also chose men who were to represent the nation in fulfilling the requirements that God had instituted. They were called priests. The priests were the ones who were to now bring the offerings and sacrifices to God at the tabernacle. And the leader of the priests is called the high priest. God told the Israelites, "When any of you brings an offering to the Lord, bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock." They weren't to bring any animal, however. God gave them very specific instructions, saying, "You are to offer a male without defect." All animals offered to the Lord were to be perfect. This was to symbolize the moral perfection that God required. The verse goes on to say, "He must present it at the entrance to the tent of meeting, so that it will be acceptable to the Lord." Notice here that the man is not presenting himself to the Lord. Never once was the man himself examined or questioned. No one asked him, "Have you been saying prayers? Have you been a good citizen? Have you been helping the poor?" No, the man was not examined. The man was a sinner. The animal was examined. The animal had to be perfect. It could have no defects, because the animal was the man's substitute. A substitute is one who takes the place of another. That day, that animal was examined, and that animal was accepted in the man's place. He is to lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering. When that man placed his hand on the head of the animal, he was admitting, "I am a sinner, but I am bringing this animal as my substitute to die in my place." Verse 4 says, "It will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him." Remember, atonement is the turning away of God's punishment. To the man, God was saying, because this animal is taking your punishment in your place, I will turn my punishment away from you. And because the payment for sin is death, that animal was then killed instead of the man. Its blood was shed. In Hebrews 9:22, we read that, "Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness." And in Leviticus 17:11, God also explains, "For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar." It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life. A life had been given in the place of another. And when God saw the blood of the sacrifice, his punishment was turned away from the man because the substitute had taken his place. Had that animal sinned and disobeyed God's commands? No, the animal was innocent. The man had sinned. He had disobeyed God's commands. He was guilty. He was a sinner. And because the payment for sin is death, that man deserved to die. But a substitute died so that the man might live. An innocent one died in the place of the one who was guilty. And so, God's punishment was turned away. That's how atonement was to be made for one man. But there was a special day every year in which atonement was to be made for the sins of the entire nation. This day was called the Day of Atonement. God said, "This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. Atonement is to be made once a year for all the sins of the Israelites." This was to take place at the tabernacle. The tabernacle was divided into two rooms, the holy place and the most holy place. Within the most holy place was a golden box that contained the 10 commandments. These commandments were God's holy laws, the covenant that he had made with them. For this reason, the box was called the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant had a lid called the Atonement Cover. It was here that God promised his people that his presence would fill the most holy place. God said, "I appear in the cloud over the Atonement Cover." God is holy, which means he is completely pure with nothing evil in him. The people, however, were sinners, and because of God's absolute holiness, he strictly forbade anyone from coming into his presence into the most holy place. A thick, multi-layered and richly embroidered curtain hung between the holy place and the most holy place, blocking access to the most holy place. With this curtain, God was showing the people that, because of their sin, they were separated from the holy God. no one was allowed behind the curtain into the most holy place. God had warned them that if anyone went behind the curtain into God's presence, they would surely die. But on the Day of Atonement, someone did go behind the curtain into the most holy place. Hebrews 9:7 says, "But only the high priest entered the inner room, and that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins the people had committed in ignorance." On that day, the high priest represented the entire nation. Every person in the nation had sinned, and because the payment for sin is death, they all deserved to die. Once behind the curtain, the high priest faced the Ark of the Covenant. Inside of the Ark of the Covenant were the 10 Commandments, God's holy laws, the laws the people could not keep, the laws that show their complete sinfulness and how much they deserved condemnation and death. In Leviticus 16:15, God commanded the high priest to take the blood of the sacrifice and sprinkle it on the atonement cover and in front of it. There, above the atonement cover, was the presence of God, and beneath him were the laws that condemned them. But now, in between the holy God and the sinful people was the blood of the sacrifice of the innocent one that had died in the place of those who were guilty. When God looked down, instead of seeing the law that condemned them, he chose to see the blood of the one who had died for them as their substitute. And in this way, God's punishment was turned away from the people and atonement was made. Through the sacrifices, God turned his punishment away from the people. The sacrifices, however, did not take away their sins. Rather, day after day and year after year, they were a constant reminder of how sinful the people were. Hebrews 10:1 explains that these sacrifices were only a shadow of the good things that were coming and not the reality themselves. You see, although the people may have not understood it at the time, every sacrifice was a picture in God's eternal plan of salvation. Each time an animal's blood was shed, it pointed to a day in the future when blood would be shed to turn God's punishment away once and for all. Every time an animal was offered as a sacrifice, it pointed to a day in the future when one who was innocent would come to die in the place of all those who were guilty. That day, atonement would be made, not only for the sins of a nation, but for the sins of the whole world. When the Israelites reached the border of the Promised Land, there was an uprising against God. Because of their lack of faith in God's power, the Israelites refused to enter the land and instead demanded to go back to Egypt. God declared that, as a result of their disobedience, only their children would be allowed to enter the land. God then led them back into the desert, where they were to wander for 40 years until their children were old enough to enter the promised land, and the older generation they had refused to enter the land had passed away. Numbers 21 describes an important event that took place during the 40 years in the desert. God had delivered his people from Egypt and freed them from slavery. And despite their constant murmurings against him, God had carefully led his people through the desert, protected them from all harm, and daily provided the food and the water they needed. Yet, Numbers 21 verse 5 tells us that the people spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the desert? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." In the face of this rebellion against him, God caused a series of dramatic events that not only would be registered in Israel's history, but would also be used by God to paint another striking picture of his eternal plan of salvation. Because of the people's rebellion against him, Numbers 21:6 says, "Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died." The venom from these snakes was a deadly poison. There was no cure for the snake bite, no hospitals, no medicine that would reverse the effects of the venom. This snake bite was fatal, and all who were bitten would surely die. When the Israelites realized the peril they were in, the people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. In response to the people's cry for deliverance, God was about to provide complete healing. Not only would this healing reverse the effects of the poison, it would also be offered freely by God. Life instead of death would be offered by God to every single person in the nation, regardless of age, social status, gender, or even past rebellion against him. In Numbers 21:8, the Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole." Moses fashioned a snake out of bronze and hung it on a pole. Now, this snake was not to be an idol to be worshipped, because throughout the Bible, God strictly prohibits the worshipping of idols. Nor did this bronze snake have any magical powers. The reason God told Moses to place a snake on a pole was to give the people an opportunity to trust him, because the healing God was offering would not be forced upon anyone. Every single person would have to choose whether they would accept the healing God offered or reject it. So, God told Moses to announce to the people, "Anyone who's bitten can look at it and live." When someone believed what God said and looked at the serpent on that pole, instantly that person would be healed and given life. But what if someone in the crowd that day said, "What? That's all I have to do? Just look? No, that's too easy. It seems too simple. I can't believe that. I'm not going to do it." What would you say to that person? Stop being prideful. Just look. Believe what God says. Trust him. Or what if someone said, "I really don't think that this whole looking is necessary. I am a very good person. I really think that God will look at me and see the goodness of my heart and all of my good works, and God will heal me." Do you think this would work? Would God heal them simply because of how good they thought they were? No, it did not matter how good a person thought they were. If someone did not look, then that person would die. And lastly, what if someone said, "I would like to look, I really would, but the problem is my family and my friends. You see, I don't think they're going to look, and what will they think of me if I did? What will they say? So I'm not going to look either." What would you say? I would say, "Friend, I am so sorry that the others around you are choosing to reject life. But you can choose life. You don't have to reject life because of them. This is your only hope. That day in the desert, thousands stood between life and death. They all had the same choice to make. Do I trust God and look, or do I refuse to listen and die? Numbers 21 verse 9 says, "When anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, he lived." God will always do what He says. You can trust His word. And what the people that day did not realize was that in the same way that Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, a day was coming when, like the bronze snake, the deliverer would also be lifted up. This event in the desert pointed to a future day when those who faced eternal death would be given the choice to not receive the punishment for their sins, but instead to accept eternal life. When a man brought a sacrifice, instead of examining the man, the priest examined the lamb. The man who had brought the lamb was a sinner who had broken God's laws and could not please Him. It was the lamb who had to be found perfect, with no defects. In the same way, God knew that you would break His laws. That's why He already planned to send the deliverer. He would live a perfect life and be examined by God in your place. After being examined, the lamb was then killed. The man was guilty, yet it was the lamb who died. In this way, God allowed His punishment to be turned away from the man. Each time a sacrifice was offered, an innocent one died in the place of those who were guilty. Every death pointed to the ultimate sacrifice that would be made in order to resolve the problem of your sin. Once a year, on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest entered God's presence, the blood of the sacrifice was sprinkled on the atonement cover. Instead of condemning the nation, God chose to see the blood of the one who had died for them, and God's punishment was turned away. This too was pointing to a future day when blood would be shed for the forgiveness of the entire world. A day when God would provide atonement for you. During a rebellion against God in the desert, poisonous snakes were sent to bite the people. God provided a way that all those who were bitten could live. They had only to look at the bronze snake and they would be healed. Just as a snake bite was fatal, you too have a fatal condition called sin. When God provided a way for the people to live, He was giving us a picture of the salvation He would offer the world, of the life He would offer to you.